Mary Oliver, the poet, said, "It's not the weight, it's how we carry it." Johnny Cash said, "Talent is God-given, but our style comes from our limitations." Years ago, back in the late 1400s, there was a piece of marble that sat in Florence, and nobody wanted to touch it, none of the sculptors, because it was this strange shape. And when they got it out of the earth, somebody had drilled a hole right through the middle. So it was the worst place for their hole to be. And it wasn't even a very good piece of marble. And it was too thin and an odd shape. Finally, this 26-year-old named Michelangelo took that weird piece of marble and created David, the sculpture that's probably the most famous sculpture in the world. But when he looked at that piece of marble, he saw what was there, not what wasn't there. I think of Usain Bolt, the runner. He's the fastest runner in the world, and he has a little hitch in his step. Now, when they teach running, if you've ever been in track, you know, they teach you to run smooth. Try to run as smooth as you possibly can, and that's how they train all the runners. But if you want to be the world's fastest, be Usain Bolt. Put a hitch in your step. There's this wonderful folk tale, and it's about a man who goes into town once a month and for supplies. And he finds this mirror. Okay, he's never seen a mirror before. So he looks in and he sees what he thinks is a picture of his father. Gotta buy this, it's a picture of my father. So he brings it home, he puts it under the bed. And a week later, his wife's cleaning and she looks in. Oh, it's a picture of a woman. Obviously, the woman her husband is seeing once a month in town. This looks like just the kind of hussy he would fall for. So a huge fight breaks out, a frying pan's involved, and then the neighbor comes over and says, no, it's a looking glass, it's a mirror. Oh, now they're in love again, and the wife goes and gets a bag of ice for his head. But it's true. We're just like the people in that story. We don't believe what we see what we believe. Just like that couple. I remember one of my favorite Bible stories is Lazarus. One of the reasons I love that story is because Jesus takes Lazarus back from the dead. But before he can bring him back, he has to tell Lazarus, I've got to take the shroud of death off of you, because as long as you think you are dead, you will be dead. I've talked to some men coming out of prison, and they say they give you a prison suit. And you have to get out of that prison suit as fast as you can, because as long as you wear it, you still feel like you're in prison. I think the key is listening. The key is listening where we are to what is really there around us. I taught a class one time with these kids, and I would tell them, you know, what makes you different gives you power. I tell them about my left arm, and I think I became a writer because of my left arm, because people would call my arm withered or crippled or say, you poor thing, or what happened. But by the words they chose, I could tell whether they blamed me, my parents, God, or themselves for my condition. And with that information, I could get what I needed out of them. So I tell them, what makes you different gives you power. So we talk to the kids and we go around and they make superhero characters out of what makes them different. And I get to this little girl and I go, what makes you different? And she goes, I'm really, really shy. And I said, I know you haven't said anything all week, but why does that give you power? She goes, because sometimes people forget I'm in the room and I'm invisible and I know everything. And she did. She knew about every kid in that class. I could ask her about any teacher. She knew everything. And sometimes I'd be talking to a teacher and, there's that little girl looking right at us. I go, where'd you come from? So listening to what is there. Rumi has a beautiful poem. The moon comes through the window, not the door. If you're waiting by the door, you're never gonna see it. So I decided to listen like that little girl. And one time I was on a bus, and ever since I started listening with everything, you hear things you can't believe. These two guys behind me once said, guess how old I am? And his buddy goes, don't you know? And the first guy goes, yeah, I know. And his buddy goes, well, then go with that. I'm learning more and more and more. And deep listening, really, when you listen with your entire self, it becomes empathy. And empathy is one of the greatest gifts. It's that gift where you get somebody's wisdom through their experience. And man, if you can be empathetic, do it. And this takes me to the story that I wanted to tell today. When I was in high school, we had this teacher named Mr. Story. And Mr. Story taught all of the eds, drivers, industrial, special, and phi, all the eds. And I was in there in phi ed, and oh man, I hated it. We had all these things like the rope climb, which I couldn't do the rope climb, and I was really little. I was so small, I couldn't, and I was always getting hit in the head and bombardment. It was a game. It's like dodgeball, part of the presidential fitness plan. Oh man, and I tell you, Mr. Story had this board on the wall, and it was all the records. How many sit-ups in 2 minutes? Who could do the rope climb the fastest? Fastest 100-yard dash. And one of them was wrestling. Who scored the most points in each weight class in wrestling? And I tell you, if there was one thing I hated the most, it was wrestling, because I was a twig. Guys would just pin me right away. Well, Mr. Story was the first one that put me with Kenny Phelps. Okay, Kenny Phelps, I knew him since grade school. Kenny Phelps worked on a produce farm his family owned. And I mean, you'd drive by and it'd be 110 degrees and there'd be Kenny Phelps out there picking tomatoes. That kid was amazing. The other thing about Kenny is he had hearing aids. He was deaf, and he had 2 hearing aids, and they were huge. They were the size of radios that he would wear on a harness. And he would take that off, though, when he would wrestle. And so Kenny would take that off for wrestling. Well, Mr. Story said, why don't I just put the 2 guys with disabilities together? And so everybody else was in a weight class, and we were the 2 guys with disabilities. Well, Kenny weighed 40 more pounds than I did, and he was solid muscle from working on a produce farm. I was like Jello wrapped around snappy twigs. And so Kenny, man, he would just come at me, and he'd already start laughing before we even wrestled. And then he would let me like lay on the ground, and I would try to pin myself to get it over with. And Kenny wouldn't let me pin myself. He'd put his hands underneath my shoulders. And then Kenny got the idea one year he was going to get the most points on Mr. Story's board. So he would let me get away, and then he would tackle me again, and then he'd let me get away. And Kenny racked up so many points. Well, I think that the gym teachers heard about this, because every year I would have to wrestle Kenny Phelps, and he would just sit there and he would be laughing even before, and pretty soon I'd be laughing too, trying to pin myself, and he would never let me. Kenny was also on the cross country team with me. I ran cross country, and Kenny mostly ran because he was also in hockey, and a lot of guys would join cross country to get in shape for hockey or wrestling. So Kenny was on our team. He wasn't very good. He'd finish in the middle of the pack, and we were at a meet one time, and the cheerleaders came. This was one of the 2 meets. The football cheerleaders would come because the football players had a bye week somehow. That week they were up. So the cheerleaders came. Oh man, almost every guy got their best time of the year at this meet because the cheerleaders were near the finish line, and we just couldn't believe it. And they would do some of the football cheers, and they didn't know any of our names. So when you'd run by, they'd name the school. They go, "Come on, Osseo. Good job, Osseo." So all of us were Osseo. So I was in the race ahead of Kenny. So I'm standing there next to the cheerleaders, of course. And I'm standing there, and all of a sudden, the race, it was hot. It was over 100 degrees. Over the hill, near the finish line, is Kenny. Kenny is leading the race, and their cheerleaders are cheering. We couldn't believe it. And well, Kenny, he's used to 110 degree heat. I mean, it was just another walk in the park for Kenny. And he comes over the hill, and he sees the cheerleaders cheering. He can't hear them, but he sees them cheering. And all of a sudden, in the middle of this race, Kenny stops. And he just soaked it in. He just stood there, and the cheerleaders, then they started doing some of their football cheers just for Kenny. At 2, 4, 68, who do they appreciate? And I said, his name's Kenny, and they said, Kenny. And so they cheered for him. All of a sudden I looked, I go, Kenny, there's a guy coming, there's a guy. So Kenny looked back, and here comes a guy from another school, and he mimed doffing his cap, and he runs, and he finishes the race. He won the race. Well, the next day in school, the cheerleaders are saying, hi, Kenny, hi, Kenny, hi. Everybody knew him. Kenny became a legend. But I'll never forget, he taught me, sometimes just soak it in. Just let the glory come. And that's the key, I think, of finding things. It's like grace. Grace isn't always a touch with the divine. Sometimes it's finding the divine in the everyday. When do we find the glory in the simplest times? So years later, I'm in college, and my roommate says, Kevin, you got to enter this wrestling tournament. I go, believe me, you don't want me entering this wrestling tournament. He says, yeah, enter this wrestling tournament because there's a weight class that's under 100 pounds. He says, nobody in the whole school, nobody's under 100 pounds. I said, I think you're right. So I signed up. All of a sudden I see signed up next to my name is Derek DeBill. Oh man, Derek DeBill. He was another little guy and he hated me. He was gonna kill me. I mean, and Derek, he was a tough little kid, tough as nails. I thought, oh man, I don't know why he hated me. I think because I was the other little guy and I was getting attention and Derek just hated me. Well, Derek weighed 105 pounds, but he said he could lose 5 pounds easy. So he was doing what they call in wrestling sucking weight. He was like wearing clothes so that he would sweat all day long. He wasn't drinking water. He wasn't eating any food, so he was just emaciated. And his eyes were rolling around in his head. But every day when he would pass me, he'd give me an evil look, and he'd hold up like 3 fingers, like 3 more pounds to go. Well, the day before the meet, he goes by me and he holds up 2 fingers, 2 more pounds. He was going to make it easy. I thought, oh man, Derek is going to kill me. And that night, I was on an intramural hockey team. I slipped and I broke my arm. I broke my arm, my left arm, and I had to have it in a cast. So I had this big cast on my arm. And I thought, thank God, I won't have to wrestle Derek because I got a broken arm. I was like, this is a saving grace. Well, the next day, the day of the tournament comes, my roommate comes running and goes, get over to the field house. Get to the field house. Derek isn't making weight. And so I throw on my jacket. I run to the field house. Sure enough, he's on the scale and he's completely naked. He shaved his head. He's done everything he can to lose every weight. Trimmed his fingernails and he can't do it. He's a pound over. So I walked up to the scale. I stood up on the scale. And I have a broken arm, so I got a cast on. I left my jacket on. And just to insult to injury, I carried a biology book and talked about what I had for breakfast. And sure enough, I came in at 95 pounds. And I won that trophy. And I still have that trophy sitting in my house. And just in honor of Kenny, sometimes I'll just sit there and I'll look at that trophy. And man, I'll just soak it in. I just soak in the glory. And there it is. It's the only trophy in my trophy case. Oh no, there's another trophy. It's a women's bowling trophy, and but that's another story.
This festival is an important fundraiser for Camp Bethel, especially this year. Our excellent sponsors stuck with us. Can you help too? Please donate using the buttons or links on this page. Thanks, friends.
We hope the festival will be back home in person next year and need your help in getting the camp ready to reopen as soon as possible for summer camps, guest groups, and special events like the festival. Please click on the link below and make your contribution toward the work, the fun, and the fellowship that find a home at Camp Bethel. Thanks for watching, and thank you for your gift.